Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's CATHETA webinar. We're coming to you live on February 28th, 2024. For those who don't already know, CATHETA means Learning in Creek. Today, we're going to be learning about tribal housing procurement. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could join us for today's webinar. If you could follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Your screen should look similar to this. At the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of a person with their hand raised, or maybe just a hand. If you click on that icon, you can signal that you want to raise your hand, that you agree, that you disagree, or that you maybe want to step away. To the bottom left of your screen, you should see a box that says Files, just like up on the graphic. Here's where you can find a copy of today's presentation slides for download, as well as several appendix items that have been included with today's presentation. So to download a copy for yourself, just click the arrow pointing downwards and it will save it onto your device. It should appear in your device's download section. The next box over is labeled Web Links. This is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to join our email list, the link to connect with us on LinkedIn, and any links that can be found on today's presentation. One of the links is a link to download the Adobe Connect app. So if you're finding a little bit of difficulty using the browser version, feel free to download that through the link and then rejoin the meeting room. Heard it's a little bit better of a user experience. And then all the way over to the right is our chat box. This is how you can communicate with the instructor and the NLC staff throughout today's webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to interact by just typing them into the chat box. There actually already is a question in there for you attendees. Looks like you were asked, what is your comfort level with procurement? So if you want to go ahead and answer that in the chat box, you could also let us know your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation. And if you end up having any kind of tech support issues, you can go ahead and put that into the chat and I'll help you out as best I can. With that, it is with great pleasure I introduce today's webinar instructor, Marie Bonville. Marie, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm excited to have you all participate in today's training. This is a discussion on procurement. We don't always get singled out like that. Typically, we're in a holistic training regarding self-monitoring, or we're talking about, the eligible activities. And of course, procurement is a part of that process, right? So to have a training for us is really neat. And I'm excited to provide you with some information today, especially if this is your first time talking about the subject of procurement. So a little bit about me. I started with the Seminole Tribe of Florida back in 2007 on the government side. My exposure to procurement started in the education department, where our funding sources required that we had some of the same policies or procedures that we'll discuss today, although those thresholds back then were a lot lower than they are, lower than they are now. Then I moved into training and technical assistance for the Native Learning Center. As their director, it was important that I would select these contractors to provide specific trainings, right? These are trainings on environmental review, self-monitoring, things that are very specific and required certain instructors, which meant that sometimes an open RFP wouldn't necessarily collect the number of contractors we needed to find, right, to get this work done across the country. So again, that exposure to procurement was in that regard. And then lastly, in the beginning stages, the NLC has officially been a training facility for some time now, but back in 2013, 2014, they were in the throes of redesigning and constructing what is the Native Learning Center's training facility, beautiful facility in Hollywood, Florida, which I will show you a picture of that in a little bit. And some funny stories along the way regarding my exposure to procurement and what I didn't know and how that process helped. Lastly, now I currently operate a residential construction and remodeling company here in Georgia, the state of Georgia, and I also have a realty group. So from the flip side, right, when you're looking at it as a contractor, you're looking at those RFPs, those scope of works to see what all is required of you before you bid. And so to have a completely different viewpoint has brought so much in terms of what I have to provide today and give you some guidance on as well. So I still provide trainings in tribal communities. Typically, it's in home ownership. That's where my passion, my love is. But I do provide some organizational and capacity management stuff as well. A little bit about me personally is that I have a bachelor's in political science, master's in public admin, and then, of course, I think my second love is community development. I might have been a planner in a past life, but I'm a wife and a mother of two, and I live in Georgia. And the kiddos are in school, so that's always a good thing. As far as my guest speaker goes, I'm super excited to have Connie Davis come on and speak with me in this discussion about procurement, because many of you are working not only in housing, but in other entities that the tribe may operate. And so I thought, it'd be cool to kind of have both perspectives from the tribal government side, because we have so many versions of folks working with IHBG dollars, but also developing their own housing within their communities on the tribal government side. So with a profound understanding of challenges in governing tribal procurement processes, I thought Connie would be a great fit. So Connie, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over and just introduce yourself to the folks.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connie Davis, and I am a Shoshone-Bannock tribal member here in Fort Hall, Idaho. I have 20 plus years in experience in procurement. I started out with the Shoshone-Bannock tribes in 1997, working for the Property and Procurement Department within my tribal government. From there, I worked in various capacities within my tribe, and including working on the phase 1, phase 2 casino and hotel project for my tribe. And I've also owned my own businesses, from ranging from concert promotions to selling cigarettes online to most recently a printing business. So in aspects of the purchasing, it's helped, owning my own businesses, because you want to save as much money as you can when it comes to procuring supplies and materials and whatnot. So I appreciate being able to speak on this panel, and look forward to any questions you may have, or and giving some insights into my experiences with tribal government and procurement.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. So with that, we're going to just go over our training description and objective real quick. Today, we're going to talk about, how we can be much more successful in the procurement and contract administration process. We'll look at the challenges that you all face and some of the best practices. We'll talk about the basic methods of procurement, especially if this is the first, discussion that you've participated in. You're going to find that it's not as hard as it looks. Once you understand where to go to find the information. We'll talk about the price cost analysis. We'll talk about contract administration findings, things that we see happening and how to avoid them, because that's the biggest takeaway. So for many of us, again, we're working under NAHASDA or other federal dollars, in which case we have to understand where we can go for the guidance. So the NAHASDA itself, the legislation itself, is the primary place in which, NAHASDA is now 28 years old. So this is the primary federal statute that, discusses Native American housing in its purest form, right? And that's with the Indian Housing Block Grant Funds and Title VI. Outside of that, there is ICDBG and other programs that are available and that utilize some of the same procurement practices. But for the most part, we're going to stay within the IHBG range just so that you can get a baseline of where to go to find the information there. Also, there's some exclusions, right? So the CARES Act and other funding doesn't always have the same procurement requirements because of the emergency nature in which it was issued. So the primary objectives of NAHASDA, first and foremost, is to assist and promote affordable housing activities. I'm just going to hit the highlights. Ensure better access to private mortgage markets, which we know has been hard for us to do. Coordinate housing provision activities, right? So we're looking at our eligible activities and ensuring that we're coordinating those efforts in housing with the use of our TDHEs or THAs or our tribal departments. We're planning and integrating infrastructure, right? That's the biggest thing for us. In most cases, we don't have that capacity just yet. And so those funding dollars have been crucial in bringing us to that point. And then, of course, developing access to private capital markets so that we can continue to grow in Indian country through housing, because it is so important in order to create a balance for economic development. You can't really have one without the other. So the NAHASDA statute revisions, I just have them kind of zippered in so that you can see that the revisions start pretty much right after its inception in 1996, 1998, 2000, and so on. And the last revision took place in October of 2010. Where to go to find the information. It is true that when you Google these things, you will almost always not get what you're looking for, in that it may be an older version. I particularly like this particular version, and I've provided that information for you in the files area and the links area, so you'll have access to it, in which it details each amendment as I indicated before. So as far as the revisions go, you can see them for yourselves. Regarding the procurement statutes that are that govern the way we that inform our procurement processing, we start with the 2 CFR Part 1000, and that is going to give you your eligibility of activities under NAHASDA, right? So this is the document that you'll need to have as well. I like to call it my toolbox. I want to have a toolbox that has these two documents first and foremost, so that we're all on the same page as a department, and for my program officers and whatnot. Then, of course, you've got the OMB Super Circular, the uniform guidance itself that that governs procurement. And this is not just specific to Native community, but the federal government in it of itself streamline the procurement, the cost principles, and the guidance on procuring items with federal dollars utilizing 2 CFR Part 200. This is where it got confusing for me. I'm not by any stretch a policy, person per se. And so, at one point it just kind of went over my head. I didn't know where to go, what to do when OMB first came out with the Super Circular. And it's been called by so many names that it also could confuse you that way. So I did provide you with the latest updates to that information. So for example, you'll see in the files area, it says 24 CFR Part 1000, updated as of 2/14/2024. So hopefully that gives you all the very latest in terms of any updates that have taken place. In 2018, the 2 CFR Part 200, that's the one I'm working off of. But there is a next step to that, right? Because thresholds, for example, change. The sheer the dollars change due to inflation and other reasons. And so HUD program guidance is our next friend in the process, right? Anytime HUD comes out with program guidance, I want to take hold of that, print those out, and have those available. Maybe saying to yourself, well, I've got the old one, I can toss those. You want to keep those too, because they have value in terms of context. Sometimes there's high turnover in some of the communities we work in. And so understanding where someone's mindset was when they made those decisions is helpful. And the program guidance can help you to understand why they made the decisions they made when they made them. Right. So I would say hold on to program guidance. If you go on the COTAC website, the ONAP's official site, you'll be able to pull up any PIH notice or program guidance that you want from the past. I also provide the most recent in regards to procurement today, and I'll show you what those look like here in a moment. I know that we have folks that span different elements within tribal government. So I also want to make sure that you understand that your internal controls are very important. And it's really important that you're having conversations. If you are TDHE, but there's also a tribal housing department, that you're in communication in regards to your procurement processes, that there's maybe like an annual meeting that takes place, that we talk about our internal controls. We make sure that certain regulations are referenced, and that we are all on the same page with the procurement process on an internal controls level. If you're not familiar with the fact that you can always be much more restrictive in your procedures or policies, but you can never be less restrictive than whatever the latest program guidance dictates, right? So, and then of course you've got your TDHE, your THA, and your department policies and procedures as well. So that gives you a good breakdown of how it works. And I think for me, it was the one thing that I felt was missing when I first started. So I'm happy to kind of lay that groundwork for everyone. When I talk about procurement, I reference those areas so that you all can use it later. These slides, my goal is I give you more information than you probably ever need so that you can go and reference it later or give it to your teammates in your departments and share this information. There's going to be a recorded version of the webinar, so that's helpful. But having those documents, being able to resource them is important. So let's talk about the definition of procurement itself. It's the purchase, lease, rental of supplies, materials, equipment, and services necessary for economical operation, maintenance, development, or rehab of IHB-assisted housing. So that's a huge way of saying that when you're working on these eligible activities, the procuring those necessary items, there's a process to it, whether that's admin or planning, whether that's the housing assistance itself, the development of infrastructure, housing services, housing management, crime prevention and safety, or model activities. These eligible activities, I wanted to bring out this latest guidance only because if you're new to tribal housing, it can sometimes be a little confusing, and I want to make sure you have the latest. Of course, you can always pull up 2 CFR Part 1000, but 24 CFR Part 1000. But I did want you to have this latest program guidance. So real quick, I'm going to pull that out and show you what that looks like. It's in the files box, so you can download it at any time. But here you'll see that as of October 2023, you have your guidance in regards to eligible activities, and it gives you an update. Of course, it references older PIH notices, but this gives you an idea of all of the new admin-related activities that have taken place under the sections within affordable housing. So there is where that information lives, and that's where you can pull it out, and it references it for you. It breaks it down, and if you're new to Indian housing, it can be a lot to consume at once. So we just wanted to make sure you had the breakdown of what this looks like. So that is the latest PIH notice or program guidance notice that is available for you to review. Let me get rid of this. All right, cool. So now that we talked about eligible activities, let's go with the basics of procurement. Allow fair and open competition for the process of procurement of goods and services, assist in being a good steward of public funds. And the reason why it's the basics is because this is going to happen whether these are tribal funds or these are federal funds. We want to make sure that we provide clarity in business dealings, that we're using the best valued product, valued service for your department, for your community, and for the agency itself. Complying with all applicable laws, HUD regulations, and your policies, of course. And then, of course, to avoid ethical pitfalls. So, the 5 main things that we want to hit home is that you need to have documented procedures, that you have to show that the items are necessary for you to fulfill the eligible activity. You want to make sure that you have full and open competition, even for your micro and small purchases. This doesn't mean that you have to receive several bids. It just means that you would, or excuse me, for micro purchases, it's just one of those things where, you know, if there's a Staples and there's an Office Max in your area, then you should be looking at both of those and have that in your documentation, that even though you're going with one, that there are others, and that you're spreading that opportunity around. The other thing is the conflict of interest itself. We'll talk about that as far as ethical pitfalls and making sure you have, and that could be real or apparent, the appearance of a conflict of interest. And then lastly, the documentation itself regarding the procured item, making sure that you have your cost price analysis. You have to make sure that there's efficiency in the cost. It reduces the risk, that the consistency itself of how you are procuring items is felt in your documentation. Avoiding the conflict of interest, promoting healthy competition, and assuring compliance. So sorry, Gwen, I got ahead of myself there, but I moved the slides over so you'll have that as well. So when it comes to procurement essentials, this is where I'm going to let Connie take over for a little bit.
Okay. And so you have procurement essentials, one being conflicts of interest, where, like, let's say you have family or friends that benefit for financial gain. That's kind of what that means. So you kind of want to avoid that kind of stuff. Procurement types, of course, as Marie had mentioned, you have the micro purchases, which I believe with the fire was increased from 10,000 to 50 or less, and that means that no bids are required. You can just go ahead and, as long as it's under that 50,000 threshold, you're able to go ahead and continue without any bids. When it comes, the second type would be the small, or it's called small or simplified, and that is 250,000 or less. And with those, you do need competitive. You need to go out for competitive bids and whatnot. The next thing we have is the contractor qualifications, where you send out, I know we used to do RFQ, which is the request for qualifications, which would include project delivery and the method of the scope of work, the time that it's going to take for that project to be completed, any recommendations or references from other businesses or maybe tribal entities that have worked with that contractor. You want to make sure you follow up with that to make sure that you're getting someone that's going to provide the services that you need, and it's from a trusted source. And then, of course, we have insurance, and then the trust factor. When it comes to general provisions, those are requirements, like the terms of payment, the terms of delivery, and then the recommended measures against contract violations. So that's what the general provisions and procedures would include. And then, of course, you have the bonding and insurance, and that's highly recommended to make sure that, you know, it protects you and also the contractor of any pitfalls that may arise. With that, I would also recommend, like, especially if it's a big project, like for the safety concerns, and then you can also go and onto the website, and they have OSHA ratings, which they give evaluation of an organization's safety performance. So that will help protect you and make sure that the contractor is, you know, doing everything in a safe manner. And then we have procurement preferences, which include product, your quantity, your price, and the place and time. Contract administration is including monitoring and making sure everything is being followed, such as planning, negotiation, execution, and performance to maximize operational performance, and it reduces risks. And then the last part of it would be construction management, which defines the unit price and the cost of the project based on rates. Monitoring, making sure everything is being followed. So yeah, sorry about that. Construction management. There's a lot to construction management, and that's like a whole new webinar here. But they have different types, which is unit price is a form of a contract, and it defines the cost of project based on rates. You have a lump sum or fixed price contract, and with that one, you have their total fee for the project. In that kind of scenario, the contractor will take most of the risk, and they can't go back and adjust their price later. Another form is a cost plus and market for actual costs for labor and materials that occur during a build, time and materials. So there's all kinds of different contract management that you can go through. And then the last one would be a guaranteed mixed price. So just depending on your funding source and everything, you just have to take what method that you will use, because it's various. So
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
So on common procurement concerns, basically what we have is professional service contracts themselves being awarded without employing the fair and open competition and not being documented as such. Indian preference not being applied in the selection process. Procurement policy or procedures that are either inadequate or non-existing, right? So it's, again, going back to having that documentation. It's so important to make sure that you're updating your policies and procedures in accordance with guidelines as guidance as it comes out. And then procurement practices that are applied, but that they're not aligned with the procurement policies that you have. So for example, as I said before, you can always have more restrictive policies, but if you're not following your own policies, they don't default back to HUDs and say, well, at least it's in compliance with us. No, they are going to say that you're not in compliance with the procurement policy as you have indicated. So that is why it's important to always revisit. And so everything we discussed just now, we are going to break down in detail. And as I said before, I would love for this to be a longer course, but as of right now, we've only got an hour and a half or so to get through it all. But we will do our best to get to contract management at the end there. So we're going to start with conflict of interest and have a discussion on that front. The recipient or subrecipient, so this is important for those that are pass-through recipients, must have an established written code of conduct. This code itself governs employees handling the contracts funded by the federal government, but it's also broadened. It's been broadened to include any subsidiaries or parent companies of the tribes themselves. So it's not just employees or individuals and their families, but it could also mean the relationship that another entity has with your organization. It prohibits individuals and organizations from conflicts of interest from participating in the contract process. And so what does that look like? The definition itself, as per the last self-monitoring guidance, is that a conflict occurs if an employee, officer, agent, or their immediate family members, partners, or organization employing or intend to employing them holds a financial or other interest in the firm chosen for the award. So that is the actual definition. But let's go a little deeper. You also can't receive any sort of soliciting or accepting of gratuities, favors, or any sort of any monetary value, right? HUD is the awarding agent, and they may impose further restrictions regarding the real or apparent. This is where it's very important to note it's real or the apparent look of a conflict. So the question is, what does your policy say? Have you established those written procedures? We no longer say policies, but we use procedures as the definition. Define what immediate means to your organization and follow that policy and that procedure. Implement a notification system for conflicts, right? So you want to be able to have a transparency there by allowing folks to notify your organization of what that conflict is so that it can be addressed. And then what's that uniform procedure for addressing the conflict itself? So since we've got so many people in the room, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to think, pair, share our our experience when it comes to procurement. For myself, I just want to highlight the fact that if you are in the procurement process and you have also been you participated in the development of the RFQ or RFP or IFB, all the different ways in which we ask for an invitation for bid, you are also not eligible to participate in applying for that particular contract because you may have the appearance of inside knowledge, right? So it's not just the familial or what we tend to kind of rely on when we think conflict of interest. It could also mean that the contractor has some sort of knowledge of the selection process, and therefore that makes them ineligible. Any other comments on conflict of interest before we move on? You're welcome to put it in the chat area. It's a little bit of a storm going on right now, so hopefully that won't interfere with our presentation, but it is raining. And so I'm getting feedback on my end, but if you're not hearing it, we'll move on to the next section. So as Connie said, procurement types is very important to the process, and it's one we want to detail. As she said, there's micro purchases, small purchases, sealed bids or the competitive sealed bid, competitive proposals, and non-competitive proposals. So we're going to get right into it and talk about the procurement types. The one thing I want to take away before I let Connie take over, sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear the rain. It's pretty heavy. Thresholds, they're in the aggregate and not for individual purchases. So that's just something I wanted to mention when she talks about what these new numbers look like for micro and small purchases. They're in the aggregate, not in the individual purchases themselves. So before beginning any procurement, it's really important to make sure that you have your cost estimates in tow. For small purchases, this could be something as simple as checking previous prices, obtaining quotes, as I said, going to the different vendors. We don't even use vendors anymore. We use contractors as the term, or the larger contracts, it could be more detailed in regards to your analysis. And this is going to include your labor and materials. We want to avoid cost plus, right? Those are inflated numbers. We want to make sure we have an actual and accurate understanding of what that looks like. So before I let Connie take over on the micro purchases, she did mention the fact that it's gone up. It is currently 10,000, but it can be up to 50,000 if your organization decides to change that number, right? So going back to the things that you can do to alleviate the burden that sometimes procurement can have in terms of access and expediency, right? The fact that it takes so long. Sometimes where we're located is sometimes remote or we don't have access to competitive bidding with the number of vendors or contractors that are available to us. So it's really important that we note that this change has taken place. The other one is that the process by which you would do that. Again, this is your policy and procedure, and you self-certify that annually. I want to bring out real quick the PIH notice that governs this particular change, and it's the change that not only exists for this micro purchase, but it's also going to update your small purchases as well. So here's the guidance right in here regarding the new micro purchase threshold. And then there's also another element in the small purchase in regards to how much the small purchase will increase as well. The only other thing I would mention is that when you're looking at the site, making that decision, that you all look at what's going to work best for your organization. There are self-monitoring plans that have been updated to include that. So as you do your self-monitoring this year, you can see how well or it worked for you. If you felt like you constantly went over that threshold, or it took too long because of the threshold and the process of needing to maybe increase it, you've kind of have to have that baseline of why before you can move forward and say, I want to move forward with a higher threshold, right? Internally amongst your department and and your leadership. So I would just say have that discussion, document that discussion. That way you can have the justification for it and have it written as well. So now I can backtrack and kind of toss it over to Connie to talk about the sealed bid process, and because those haven't changed.
Right. Okay. So for construction and routine supplies above all small purchase limit, the recipient should be prepared for the following: making an independent cost estimate and specifications, meaning that you want to be specific on all your specifications of what you're needing and wanting, and advertising of the procurement, and that can be done through soliciting through newspapers or any other websites that might do government advertising, or if it's even going out and soliciting contractors yourselves that you may have used in the past. Use the sealed bids or formal advertising method. Publicly ask for bids, we just mentioned, and award a firm fixed price contract to the lowest responsible bidder. And of course, this method is preferred to for getting construction goods and services. Usually a competitive bid is you have it in a sealed envelope and it's not open until the date stated in the RFP or the RFQ or quote, and it's open all at the same time. And usually the highest bidder is usually declared. So that's what that is. And you can go out and seek qualifications by using the SAMS.gov. I'm not sure if you're wanting to know or place your bid out there, you can go and place your bid on that website as well. Go ahead and do the next, please. An invitation for bids can be advertised publicly. Like I said, you can go through newspapers or the SAMS.gov. The IFB should contain specification and relevant attachments, which will clearly outline the scope of the services or product that you are seeking. Bids must be publicly open at the specified time and place, and it can either be done with all the contractors there, or you can just do it amongst your department team. And all bids will be evaluated based on the same criteria, depending on the size of the project, I guess. I know the projects that I've worked on, you could either do it, you have like a little review panel that you might go, and sometimes you have score sheets that you might want to participate in, and you guys do evaluations based on that. And usually that's good practice for documentation to show that it was fair and equal. And all bids are evaluated based on the same criteria, and the contract is awarded in either writing to the lowest bidder that meets the requirements. And bids may be rejected with a documented reason. So like maybe they didn't meet a certain qualification that you were seeking, they can be taken out for that reason. Next. And then the sealed bids is the best for traditional construction projects, but not for procuring professional services like architectural or consulting. I know on that aspect for the architectural and consulting, like again, we use like a request for qualification where we solicited architects or general contractors based on their qualifications and their means that they were able to meet the qualifications to do a project. In competitive proposals, both technical and price factors were weighed. And then, of course, you got multiple offers and are usually considered. And contracts can be a fixed price or cost reimbursed. And again, that falls back into all those different kind of contracts like time and materials, fixed price, and you have different ways. It just depends on what your funding source maybe requires maybe. And then competitive proposal example. If this method is utilized, the recipient must adhere to the following guidelines. Prepare a statement of work outlining procurement needs, publicizing your RFP, detailing the technical and scope and price evaluation factors and their importance, solicit proposals from a sufficient number of qualified sources, and have a process for evaluating proposals. Again, if you want to get like a team or whatever to evaluate all of those qualifications in the RFPs to make sure that everything's going to be met. Award contractors to responsible firms whose proposals offer the most benefit to your program. And of course, you want to consider both price and other factors. And then the competitive proposal procedures can be used specifically for architectural and engineering professional services to select the qualified competitor, just to make sure that everything is fair and negotiated and the documentation and all that. Non-competitive proposals, you just want to make sure everything's fair and open, and that you're getting the best price and that it's documented.
Awesome, thank you. So on non-competitive, going back to my work with the Native Learning Center, in this particular case, I'm looking for instructors on things like environmental review, very specific. Oftentimes I only had one available source, right? Sometimes I know you all, in considering what took place with Corona and the pandemic, you had a public emergency, in which case waiting for competitive bids was also not a possibility. HUD approves the non-competitive process. The agency itself, your representatives, you work with them to get that, but it has to be in writing. Proposals must be sought after attempts to get bids from multiple sources proves inadequate. And that's, of course, what happened here at the Native Learning Center. We had tried it the other way. For larger conferences, I could say that maybe, when you've got 30 different instructors and there's going to be, breakout sessions and things like that, that's more enticing for folks. But when it's an individual, let's say it's some sort of compliance or, technical assistance that I need to provide, then I can't go that route. I need somebody who's going to be able to provide an in-depth training with materials and case studies and whatnot. And that just needed to have a different scope of work. So going back to the specs and the statement of work, it's really important that it also includes those things. So it's not without that fair and open procedural process that Connie has detailed for you. And HUD, or the office itself of ONAP, they may ask for the pre-award review of the procurement documents and independent cost estimates to justify the need for the single source. So I'm going to go ahead and for this Think, Pair, and Share, I'm just going to put this question in the chat area, but it's how many of you have updated your procurement thresholds and why? So if, just kind of getting an understanding of what was the need surrounding increasing those procurement thresholds from the minimum of 10,000. And I think small purchases was like 150 to now that 250 mark or somewhere in between. So just curious to see if that is something that you all have done. The other thing I wanted to mention, I do have the self-monitoring plan located in the the file pod. And that is where you can see that it has the updates in regards to the 2 CFR Part 200, but it doesn't have those new thresholds. So I just wanted to put that out there that, I'm sure it will come, but in the meantime, it is a good tool if you're needing to just kind of revisit your procurement policies and making sure you've got all your references updated. So on procurement administration, let's see, anybody answered that question yet? We've got 26 people in the room. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys answer that. Let's talk about the contractor qualifications. It is really important that we note that the contractors have to have be responsive and reliable. It's not enough, and so that the responsibility itself as that that body of information is provided. What does that mean? The quality of workmanship, that they're responsive and responsible for the work that they provide, the ability to perform the required work financially and technically, maintaining a satisfactory record of integrity, demonstrating satisfactory past performance, if they've worked with your community before, and then of course all the rules and regulations regarding insurance and bonding, whether that includes Indian preference and tarot and all of the things associated with that. So again, going back to the qualifications and where they're referenced in the 2 CFR Part 200, this is where you would find it. SAM does require that, SAM.gov is where you would go to find out if someone has been disbarred, suspended. You do not have to engage with businesses that are in that status. We want to make sure that you're not. And so this is one of those areas that we do see when I go out to do technical assistance for folks. We find that, they are using contractors that have had negative experiences with other tribes, in that the tribes have indicated, the ones nearby, that they wouldn't work with this person again. And yet here we are. Part of that is, forming a community that talks to each other, that talks about the contractors that are in and around their area, that instead of being a silo, that they're going out and finding this information. If it's not as severe as a disbarment or a suspension through SAMS.gov. So it's just one of those things where we wanted to make sure you knew where to go to find the information. And this guide sheet does just that. It'll talk to you about how to find the excluded party on SAM.gov, and then what you can do as a community to make sure that you're talking to other tribal communities nearby, who have worked with these contractors in the past. So the things that we want you to avoid, again, going back to the cost plus and percentage model, this is essentially inflating the cost itself. And we don't want to do that. Ensure authorized program officials sign your purchase orders and contracts. I remember when we switched over in the education department from allowing the directors to have authority over the check requisitions at the time and other procurement methods, that it was sent to the procurement department, right? The tribe was moving away from that independence and giving, and those directors had to give that responsibility to the procurement department. It created confusion at the beginning because I think a lot of times change is hard. Why do we have to do it this way? You get a lot of that. And so it's really important that you all define who your program officials will be in terms of signing the purchase orders and the contracts, making sure you have secondary signatures, or that, because people do need to go on vacation, things need to happen, but we don't want that to impede the project's success, right? So making sure you have another means, and that it's defined in your policies and procedures. Verified delivery of the items. This is a huge one. You want to make sure that the delivered items match the purchase orders. I know we're all busy, but there's something to be said about not having the items and having to backtrack or get that remedied, right? So it's really important that you're going back and making sure that every time there's a delivery of purchased items that you verify those items. Paying vendors promptly after delivery, inspection, and approval. That's an important part of procurement itself, making sure that the vendors are also, contractually, you all are obligated to perform, and so are they. So this is one of those things where, whether they're on Net 30 or some other payment procedure, make sure that you're fulfilling your role as well. Conducting the cost and price analysis for procurement actions. These are the best practices, the things we see that happen to get dinged the most as far as self-monitoring or compliance issues are concerned. Include contract provisions for 2 CFR Part 200 in your grant-assisted contracts. So this is important, making sure they're referenced, those provisions are there, and documenting the administration system itself so that the contractor has, that you have that performance itself through reporting. Oftentimes they'll kind of put it on the back burner. I'll get it to you later. And you need to have that in the file regarding the movement of the project and the reporting itself on, not just their payment schedules, but their timelines, their work schedules, connecting with their through inspections to make sure that everything is making sense and that they're all on the same page and that they've been paying their workers. So verifying that as well. Procurement provisions and procedures. Here are just those references for you so that you can go back and look at them later. Now we're going to go to the file management itself and making sure that your files are up to date in case you were to get audited. So, Connie?
Okay, so this is a important part, just as Marie had mentioned, for auditing purposes. You just want to make sure that all your procurement documents are in line and that you have all your bids there, or if there's any, like I said, like a review or a panel or whatever, if you have any other documentation that needs to be attached, like your score sheets or stuff like that, because you want to make sure you ensure transparency and accountability of, and that you're being good stewards of the money, and making sure that you're also following your own policies and procedures. So you want to make sure that your procurement files are all in line and transparent and everything, in case that you get audited. It's all there and it's transparent and it's easy to find. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Bonding and insurance and minimum requirements. You just want to make sure if the recipient hasn't set its own bonding policies approved by HUD, they must meet these minimum requirements. They guarantee of 5% of the bid from each bidder, ensuring they'll fulfill their bid commitments. Performance bond in the contractor for 100% of the contract price in securing their obligations. Payment bond from the contractor for 100% of the contract price, ensuring payment to laborers and material suppliers. Actually, Marie, you probably could touch base more on this stuff than I probably could.
Sure. So in regards to the bonding and insurance itself, this is just that protection, the level of protection that you want to make sure you have. When I worked with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, we also had to make sure we were named an additional insured. So that way, if there were any changes to those minimum requirements, that we would be notified immediately. So that way we could protect our this investment that we're making in regards to this relationship and the work that's being done. So these are just the minimum requirements. Of course, you as an organization can choose to increase these amounts, but you would need to follow those increases if that's what you choose as an organization. So that's the big thing there. In regards to another requirement that we wanted to touch on, it's Indian preference and working with your tarot office. So Connie, I'm going to let you handle this part as well.
Okay, so on Indian preference, you, as Maria mentioned, you want to make sure it follows within your tarot guidelines and preferences. I know working with our tarot, we had you can either do it two ways. You can either solicit all your tarot certified contractors in an RFP, and then go out, and if you don't get enough of the contractors to bid, then you can go out and seek other. That's very time consuming. So what we used to do is we used to send it to both our Indian preferred and outside non-Indian preferred contractors. That way it saves time. And then there's also a part that we dealt with in our tarot where the native firms were allowed, like if they came over a non-native company, they were allowed to rebid within a certain percentage. So to give them, or they didn't even have to rebid if it fell within that percentage, they were automatically given that preference, even though they were a higher bidder. As an IHBG recipient, the organization must ensure that its procurement policies providing this preference is required by the Indian Self-Determination Act and Education Assistance Act. And if the organization already has an Indian preference policy approved by HUD and it meets the requirements. So that was just an example of from my tribe and how we work with Indian preference. Okay, recipients can consider implementing two-stage preference, as I mentioned before, to go ahead and seek bids or proposals from those Indian-owned enterprises. And again, you can open it up to non-native contractors. Okay, and then the TARO is a primary purpose of the TARO program is to enforce tribally enhanced Indian preference law to ensure that any Indian and Alaska Native people gain their rightful share to employment, training, contracting, subcontracting, business opportunities on Indian reservations and Native villages. So again, TARO is not just limited to Indian preference. It also goes for employment as well, as long as it's within the reservation boundaries and stuff. So that means that you will give preference to tribal workers on construction projects, and it's to help gain training and whatnot. And with our TARO, especially, let me say, as far as employment goes, you have to take in consideration Davis-Bacon wages, which it's a set rate, and you can go on the website and find out what the Davis-Bacon wages are. Or we have like a prevailing wage scale. Sometimes your TARO will have their own prevailing wage, and where you keep track of the time or labor hours, and then the contractor will have to pay those prevailing wage scale, or if it's a Davis-Bacon wage. And usually Davis-Bacon falls when it's a federally funded project. If it's not, let's say it's non-federal, Davis-Bacon does not apply. So you want to make sure that you know where your funding source is and if you're supposed to be paying those Davis-Bacon wages.
And it will also be in excess of $2,000, right? So anytime you're curing a
from my experience, it was 5,000 or more.
Okay.
At least that was with our, and I don't know if that's within your own tribal policies. Again, I guess that's ours was 5,000.
Okay.
And
Well, I think the baseline is 2,000, and again, you can be more restrictive,
right, correct,
or less as far as that goes. But everything that it's my understanding that it's 2,000. But also too, I've got some folks in the room that say, what was it? They have been working in procurement and wrote the book on it and have stories to tell. So if you want to confirm that for us, that's more than fine too. This particular area, I work closely with our compliance resource officer, Vince Franco. And so that was just the information that I had received from him in terms of the Davis-Bacon stuff. But I'll definitely make sure to confirm that before we leave today with the folks in the room. So in regards to contracting with small and minority firms, how does that work? Or what was your experience with it?
It was we gave preference to all of those that were minority owned firms. It's just kind of the same as the Indian preference, where those minority and small business firms were given the opportunity first. That is, if they can provide the services and was able to financially be able to do the jobs, and they were qualified to do it. So it was kind of the Indian preference fell first, and then all the others came next in line.
And the other thing to note is, although you're not allowed to break up purchases to avoid the competitive process of an RFP or RFQ so that it can be a small purchase or a micro purchase, you are allowed to, however, break up projects in order to provide opportunity for small and minority firms as well. So that's just a unique take on it. It's different from breaking it up to avoid procurement procedures, this is breaking it up so that you can allow for smaller firms to be able to take on some of the work of a project. So that was just another one that was just up to
Correct.
me.
Depending on the scope or whatever, if you can break up a scope or whatever, like say electrical or plumbing or mechanical or something like that, yes, you can definitely
Awesome.
break it up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So now we're going to move with the last half an hour and talk about construction management. We're going to break down two parts of this scenario. The first part is going to be the responsibilities of your organization to ensure that you're collecting the reports that you need, that you're going through an inspection process to monitor the work, the coordination of meetings and touch points to ensure that the project is successfully being managed. Of course, there has to be a payroll management discussion, field interviews, when to have them and why, the contractor schedules. Obviously, we all know that with construction, there's the saying, we make plans and God laughs. Things happen, and it could be weather, it could be labor, there are a million reasons why things don't work out the way that we plan them. But then also the monitoring of insurance. So I'm going to, let's see here. I have lost track. Connie, is this your section or mine?
I don't remember.
Well,
I think
no worries on that front.
let's see. Let's see. No, this is you.
Okay, cool. So on reporting. Oh, it is you. Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sick and my head's not here. Sorry, guys.
No worries.
Okay, so reporting. Recipient responsibilities for obtaining all contract required reports, construction documents, and architect, engineering contracts. That could be like all your inspection reports, and all the necessary contract documents to your requests for information, submittals, any changes to the architectural drawings, stuff like that. Performing inspections, once again, that falls within maybe your special inspections for all maybe concrete and asphalt and soil and stuff like that. Recipient to coordinate competent supervisory and inspection personnel throughout the contract period, and that's just managing those inspection contractors if you choose to hire any contractors to handle those reports and stuff. And coordinating construction meetings, regular meetings with architect, engineers, and contractors, which is usually called the OAC, owner, architect, and contractor. We used to do weekly meetings just to make sure that everything is on schedule, or if there were any concerns that came up on the project, we would all get together and review those, to go over schedule, make sure everything was following within schedule, the work progress, making sure everything was, following the schedule. Issues or deficiency identified during inspections, if there were any problems or with some of the inspections that we had to address, delinquent reports, and then of course making sure that we're following within that construction timeline. Next. Informing the contractor of its subcontractor responsibilities. A lot of the times, you have your electrical contractors, your plumbing and HVAC contractors. You just want to make sure that we're following up with those contractors and that they're managing their subs the way that they're supposed to. Subcontractor responsibility notification, inclusion of Indian preference and prevailing wage rate requirement for all contracts between the contractor and the subs is mandatory. And again, that falls within your tariff too. All your contractor and their subs will be subject to tariff if that applies. Contractor reminder, the recipients must remind the contractor of its responsibilities to ensure that potential subcontractors comply. with the recipients and funding agency requirements. And then all their subcontractor documentation is all in order as well. And they'll have their own separate contracts too, I'm sure, but that usually falls within the general contractor. And informing the contractor of payroll responsibilities. The contractor is responsible for paying out less than the applicable wage rates to all employees engaged in work under the contract. And it's their responsibility to ensure that the contractors are paying their applicable wage rates per the contract. And then the recipient shall remind the contractor of these responsibilities. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Attaining and reviewing payroll reports and forms. Usually the contractor and subs as well will have to submit their certified payroll report. And I know they did that for the Tarot to make sure that all the training fees and stuff are included for like maybe apprentices and stuff like that, and for training purposes. Each week during the contract period, execution of the contract, the contract completion, and acceptance by the recipient. And then a separate payroll report shall be submitted for the contractor and each of the subcontractors. In the event that no payroll for the week, the contractor is required to submit no payroll report. And this also falls in line, like when you're paying your contractor, sometimes I'll go through the pay applications and make sure that, you know, all the labor and stuff coincides with the work progress. Next slide. The recipient will conduct interviews with the contractor's employees to gather corroborating evidence supporting wages reported on the contractor payroll reports. These interviews will be documented in a memorandum and filed in the contract file. In obtaining contractor schedule, that's very important as far as timelines and funding sources and stuff. When progress payments are made, the recipient must ask the contractor to create a construction progress schedule and payment schedule within 5 days of issuing notice to proceed. So we used to have to go through the pay applications of the contractor and the subs, and we had to review all the receipts and everything that was incoming and go over the schedule to make sure that what we were paying, the progress coincided with the schedule, and to make sure everything was running on time and smoothly, and that what all the costs of the materials and everything was up to snuff of where we were at in the project. The recipient shall approve and monitor insurance policies obtained by contractors and subs to ensure that the coverage required by the contract needs. So we just want to make sure that's all up to date and that they're still carrying the insurance for the project. Okay,
Awesome.
and then we move on to construction management.
Well, I told you procurement was going to be fun. We couldn't even remember which one. Not part one or part two. So now I'm going to take over on part two and talk a little bit about payment schedules, contract changes and orders, liquidated damages, your final inspection, the settlement documentation, and final payment and warranty inspections. And Connie, where appropriate, I may lean on you as well, in that you do have some projects that you've worked on recently that you might want to highlight. So I'll allow that time for that as well. So the recipient itself needs to make sure that they're paying attention to their progress payments, as Connie mentioned, and that the acceptable work and the materials typically gets paid out every 30 days. Funding agency or authorization is not needed for the progress payments, and as long as you're sticking with your approved payment schedule. In regards to the review and approval process, this goes back to making sure that you're sticking with your procedures, that the contractor requests that the request for payment itself aligns with the approved scheduled amounts, that the architect has given its approval for the payment request, and that the request itself excludes any sort of retention under the contract for any like contingencies. So, for example, the review and approval process, the second part of that is that the work covered by the payment has been performed. The periodic estimate for partial payment has been properly executed, and applicable support documentation submitted. Just as Connie mentioned before, the contractor submitted all required reports and payroll reports as well. So this is the list of documentation that we want to be aware of: the distribution of documents, contract change orders, time extensions, right? So I had the pleasure of working with a community out in California, Dry Creek Rancheria, and as it turns out, they were in the middle of their project on an elders unit, mixed use, and it's going to have a community center, and it's going to have an elders center area along with housing. And so some of the issues that they ran into during the pandemic had to do with contract change orders, time extensions, and just the sheer cost of things changing from where we started with the bid. So when these things happen, the goal is to make sure that they'll be prepared in a form that you all have described and agreed to ahead of time, so that it gets the proper authorization from your procurement officials. So that's just one thing I wanted to note. Final inspection process. The contractor must promptly notify the architect and recipient in writing of the completion of the work itself. Tons of inspections take place, and I think more importantly, to make sure that you're having those meetings to determine when those inspections will take place. Of course, this could include if there's some sort of permitting or approval that needs to take place on your construction side. If you're a department and you have those sort of thresholds as well, then you want to make sure that things are being signed off of as they go. The inspection conference, as I said before, the meeting itself needs to discuss some of the following. The work has been completed in accordance with the construction documents. Then if there's any punch lists or minor items that need to be discussed, that it's documented at that point, and that if there are any major deficiencies regarding the work itself, that it's corrected by the contractor. So just that punch list, making sure that you're doing your due diligence to ensure that the contractor has completed the work as prescribed, that they're fulfilling the performance. So settling the documents, you want to make sure that the original document and 2 copies, these are the things you need to have in your final inspection report and files. So I just have it detailed here. Your original document and 2 copies of the contractor's release of certification. And this will confirm that the work is finished as per the plans, except for any minor items, like I said before, the punch list. That the total payment due to the contractor and any separate amounts are pending any claims, that the recipient is free of any claims except those mentioned in the release. And then, of course, you want to have your final payroll reports labeled final, transfer all guarantees and warranties. This is a big one, making sure that, for example, with the subs, if there's HVAC or other warranties, things that where we need to have that, we have to have the point of contact for those warranties. We want to make sure we have that before we let the general contractor walk, and then submitting that final partial payment estimate as well. So going back to contractor responsibility. Oh, sure. Go right ahead.
Can I do that? When she talks about the transfer all agreement and warranty to the recipient, what we did was the contractor had to turn over all the warranty, all the manuals and stuff like that to the equipment. And also we had to make sure that we had the final as-builts for the structure before we made final payment. So those are kind of things to give into consideration as well.
So your certificate of occupancy, all of that would be in your settlement documents.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
As far as contractor responsibilities, we wanted to just outline and detail that they are liable for damage to other work resulting from those defects. So and typically you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those other elements as well. And it's all outlined here for you as far as contract payment, final payment, and warranty inspections. So the good thing about this particular presentation is that you can go ahead and use it as a checklist if this is your first time working with a contractor. Here are the contractor responsibilities listed for you as well, things that should be included in their reporting as far as start dates of construction, dates of contract awards, bid specifications, minutes from pre-construction meetings, documentation regarding any violations or wage rate issues, registration records of apprentices, trainees, signing off on those documents, and that payroll records of employee interviews, and then of course your certified payroll by project. There was something I was going to mention. Oh, is there a recommended contract management software that you all used? Or that we're familiar with? And so for myself, we actually used Force Account, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, which meant that we did much of the work of the general contractor ourselves, in-house as a construction committee within the Native Learning Center, as opposed to using a more formal contract management system. But maybe Connie, do you have any that you all are familiar with, or if anyone in the group has one that they'd want to put in the chat that you're using, feel free to do so.
The ones that I've worked with was BIM, and gosh, I just went blank on some of the other ones that we use, but they're more contractor software programs that we use. So
can you put it in the chat for me, just so that people can have the name of it? It's documented somewhere what the name is. And I got some people typing already in the chat as well, so hopefully we'll give you a few options to choose from. I know that sometimes they can be costly, but that's a really good question as far as managing the documentation itself and having it in one place. As we said before, these are the documents or the things that we want to make sure we have: project number, designations, name of contractor, description of work, bid opening date, contract award date, contract amount, and start of construction. So what is Force Account? Going back to kind of who managed what. When I worked with the Native Learning Center, we did it as a team, and we decided to be our own general contractor. So it offers a check and balance system if your capacity is there, and in which case our compliance and resource director, he had also had a background in construction, so it made sense for us to go that route. Great, Susan, I appreciate that. The question is, I was going to ask about Force Account crew. If we had them go out for an emergency, do they have to get procurement for supplies to fix what's needed to be done? And the answer is yes. They don't have to. This would be considered a request for quote sort of situation where you're just documenting why you're using your Force Account crew, as opposed to or you're selecting that option. It's probably the most efficient and effective way for you to get the work done in a timely fashion. So in that way, you're going to use that process. And also to check your, I would also just caution you to check your policies and procedures, make sure that it's detailed that way as well, in terms of the use of your Force Account crew and any sort of regulations or procedures or policies you have regarding the use of that group. But what is Force Account itself? It's basically the IHB. The way IHBG works is that it's allowing the recipient to take on the role of GC. And then there are risks that you're taking on as well, which is why capacity is so important. You engage with the architect and engineers. You retain the subcontractors and hire them. You finance the project. Obviously, you're going to do your draws and have your contingency in place. You're going to coordinate the contractors and do the inspection. Sometimes this goes back to the capacity of the organization. You know, if you have a community development department and you have inspectors on staff and you have the capacity for it, then it could be a great cost-saving tool. It's crucial that you have that you prepare for this process, because it can be overwhelming, and you want a lot of cross training, I think, to take place as well, for a couple of reasons. Because if someone is out, you don't want to have any sort of delays in your project, because now there's someone crucial to the project that is not available or able to assist. So I broke it down into a couple different sections. The first is the technical capability. The recipient must ensure that you have the technical expertise on your staff to be able to take on a role like this. And this includes construction management, oversight, specialized tax, so a program manager of sorts. Let's see here. On the administrative capacity side, of course, someone that can handle project logistics, documentation, compliance. We had a great procurement and contract management person on staff as well. So we didn't really have to worry about that. She was intense, to say the least. And she liked doing those on-site inspections and talking to the subcontractors to make sure they were getting paid. There's certain personality types that lend well to these projects as also. So force account can work for you if you have those sorts of people on staff. Project timeline and budget. Recipients must ascertain the ability to complete the project within the projected time frame. Remember, you're also maybe leveraging your IHBG funds with other funds, whether it's ICDBG or other things. And so sometimes that can get a little confusing as well. So just making sure you have the time to manage the project and that the funding itself is going to roll over if something were to happen. And then let's see here. We've got self-assessment. The recipient should conduct a thorough self-assessment. So this is your typical SWOT analysis. Like, what's good about our group that can handle force account? What are some pitfalls or areas that we would have to beef up? Maybe some cross-training, maybe some new hiring in order to see a project successfully to completion, right? So what would it look like for you? This is going to give you that list for, an ED to kind of think it through and determine if it's something they want to move forward with. The benefits, of course, is that you have control over local hiring, the budget, the project timeline. It also provides some saving, as I said before, and it develops skills for the future. I know for myself, I walked in on our training facility update, and I didn't know anything about construction at that point in terms of project management. I remember sitting in a room. Somebody was talking about the training facilities. They were going over these, elaborate plans. And when it was time for our electrician group to come in and our IT person to come in and talk about the facility itself and what we would offer, I didn't hear anything but about Apple TV this, Apple TV that. And I thought, that's strange. Where's the projectors? And I was so scared. I was afraid to ask. Finally, I mustered up the courage and I asked about the projectors just to find out they hadn't actually put it in the system. They hadn't put it in the project. Like, for whatever reason, it just got missed. And so here we're going to have a training facility without projectors and projector screens, right? So back to the drawing board. So going back to Alicia's question, can a budget with contractors be renegotiated and with a new budget? The answer is yes, but it takes documentation. You have to show where the issue lies. In this case, it was not having projector screens. It was the cost savings. We didn't need the Apple TV. And so we were able to adjust. The IT department hadn't purchased the Apple TVs just yet. There was some cost in terms of rewiring and positioning of the screens and the projectors and whatnot. But, because it was justified, going back to my first set of slides, documenting procedures, is it necessary? In this case, it was that we had full and open competition. That all still took place just for a specific reason. So short answer is yes.
Marie,
So go right ahead.
if I can add on to that, that's usually called a change order. So a change order is a written amendment to an existing contract that alters the worker's scope. And it also includes contract sum and time. And so you would initiate that as a contract change order. And that's also, if your project has a contingency, then it allows for those errors or whatever things that were missed. You can use that as part of your budget to cover those costs.
Perfect. Thank you for that. As far as the risk with forced account, just so that we can be balanced in our discussion about it, certainly you're taking on that responsibility. There could be some additional costs in terms of, number of hours on a project, time management, budget, and the work quality itself. You're assuming that responsibility as the GC. Lack of fixed pricing and absence of performance bonds or security, going back to that bonds and insurance discussion that we had earlier. If you're responsible, then you're taking on that liability as well if something were to not be correct. Construction project management requires specific knowledge and sophistication in areas. Managing subs can be a feat. I won't say it's, but it's something that you have to have the body of knowledge to understand and know what happens first, second, third. Potential for cost overruns are real. Delays in completion and conflicts with contractors do take place, or the recusal, the change of a contractor, which has happened in the past. And so, Connie, I'll let you talk about that a little bit because I'm sure you've experienced some of that as well.
Yes, definitely. So we had one of our projects where I had quit. And so we had to go out and we had to do a whole new RFP and everything to get new architects. And then we got all that negotiated and back online. And then we went out and we hired a general contractor and everything. And then we had to fire the general contractor. So then we had to go out and, RFP for a new contractor. Oh my gosh, it was such a mess. I think we went through like two architects and like, I'm not kidding you, like 3 different general contractors. And it was funny because when the one general contractor walked out, and it was during the holidays. And so our project manager had gone home, and everyone was off, and I was pretty much the only one there. And all of a sudden, I seen all these contractors moving out, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" So yeah, they just all up and I held it out there. So I mean, this last project I worked on was quite interesting, and we had to go and we had to solicit emergency stuff because we had to make sure the site was secure. And like I said, it was during winter time. We had to make sure everything was, heated, and that, all the sheetrock and everything was taken care of. So then we had to really kick it in high gear and do some emergency procurement to make sure that the project, was, okay before, since all that stuff went on, you had to think of security and heating and everything to make sure that the project was going to move forward. So yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It does happen. It never goes as we plan sometimes, but the good thing is, once you do have that final product, it's something that the whole community can be proud of. And so with our last couple minutes here, I just wanted to highlight the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. We're talking about NAHASDA and how it assists us in building the capacity of not just our low-income housing options that are available, but also increasing our housing capacity in terms of what our TDHEs, our housing authorities, our tribal departments can do. And so this is a fully funded tribal project that created 25 new housing units. And these particular acronyms go through the Choctaw Housing and Loan Program. But this is the first project that they've done with their entirely funded with tribal revenues. So now that we take this body of knowledge, it can be applied, and these basic principles can be applied to our own projects, which is just something to be proud of. So with that, we just wanted to give you a chance to think, pair, and share, talk to each other, or to us, ask us questions. If you have any in the chat area, as I said before, all the links and the files are available for you all to access things. And we really hope that you had a good experience with procurement. Hopefully it won't be your last, but it gives you an understanding of where to find information, what to look out for, and how to be successful in your projects. So when it's done correctly, procurement itself allows the organization to obtain the highest quality at the most reasonable price. It ensures compliance, of course. Compliance is always essential to what we do with federal dollars and with our own tribal dollars. So making sure that we're in compliance with our procedures, maintaining accurate and thorough documentation throughout the process. Documentation. I think we've talked about that so much today. Facilitating efficient delivery of services. We talked about emergency services and the need to protect what work has been completed, right? Now you should have a good understanding of the overall process and how to implement, future procurement procedures. For example, if you're looking at increasing your thresholds and the why behind it. And then, of course, building your own capacity and that of your organization to leverage resources, right? Because NAHASDA dollars aren't going to be enough to get these work done. As I said before, sometimes the pitfall is that the contractors can't or won't bid because they're afraid of what the increases will look like in the future with inflation and labor and material costs and whatnot, the shortage of labor in the future that we're experiencing now. So these are the types of things that if you're procurement minded, you should be thinking about. And we're, again, thankful to have you all visit us today and talk about it. The resources that we provided, for those of you who'd rather just go on the website, I provided you with the links as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you, Connie, for your contribution today. It was really great to kind of bounce things off of you and get that expertise that you bring, having worked for the tribal government side of procurement.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I had fun. I don't know how you can make procurement more fun than that, but it was fun. So I've got my contact information there, but I also have Connie's information as well. So if you'd like to connect with us, this is about networking as well. We're hoping that you all don't stay in silos, that you get to start to see the names and organizations in the chat area, and that you connect with someone so that you can learn and from them as well. At this point, I'm going to toss it back over to the Native Learning Center so they can close you out and we can get some feedback on how we did.
All right. Thank you so much, Marie and Connie. What an incredible presentation. So much great information about procurement. I did go ahead and launch the feedback survey for everybody. If you could take a minute to fill that in for us, it's anonymous. You can be as candid as you want, but the feedback you give us helps us to do more of what's working well for you and tweak anything that is needing it so that we can continue to improve our webinars always. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. That is also going to be with Marie. This one's going to be on tribal housing education, engaging future and existing clients. This will be happening on March 6th. As always, registration is free, so we hope you can join us for that one as well. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online. You can find them on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. There's a Cathedral webinar section with a recorded webinars tab. And through that, you can find our catalog of webinars. It goes back 2 years. So feel free to view those, share them with your friends, share them with your colleagues. And please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We even have a podcast titled The Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and self-determination. You can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or if you prefer to watch video versions with our guests, you can find that on our YouTube channel. All right, folks, once again, thank you to everyone who joined us today for the webinar. Thank you to our incredible presenters, Marie and Connie. And I hope that we can connect with everybody again real soon. I'm going to go ahead and close out the recording. Thanks again, everybody.